This is Facets of Connection, where we are transforming relationships within an evolving world. Brought to you by Relational Life Foundation and hosted by me, Sarah Melissa Oswald. This exclusive podcast series delves into the heart of human connection, exploring how we learn, love, and collaborate within a dynamic society. We'll uncover the power of respectful relationships and their essential role in the human experience. I invite you to embark on a journey with me to create a more connected, empathic world for future generations. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to an extraordinary guest, Laurie Lazar, the founder and executive director of Realness Project, which is a nonprofit transforming lives and reshaping the culture inside prisons. She teaches something called authentic relating, where incarcerated individuals learn essential skills in communication, conflict resolution, and opening their hearts to themselves and to each other in a way that some of them have never actually done before. These are tools that not only help them thrive behind bars, but also prepare them for a successful re-entry into society. With a recidivism rate of less than 6% among program participants, Laurie's work is creating safer communities for all of us and proving that human connection can spark profound and lasting change. In my conversation with her, we explore her inspiring journey, the power and impact of the programs that she teaches, and the ripple effect of rehumanizing our prison system. The stories that Laurie shares with me throughout this discussion are so incredibly touching to me. In fact, every time I spend time with Laurie, she tells me another story that rips my heart open in the most beautiful way. I'm so inspired by her work and thrilled to share this heartwarming and eye-opening discussion with you. And with that, here we go. I have a belief that each one of us is so unique based on our life circumstances and our skill sets and what we've been up against in our lives and the gifts that we each bring and come to life with, that it makes us uniquely designed with a particular light that we are meant to share with the world around us. And it's my personal belief that it is our duty to become aware of what this light is and to figure out how to bring more of it to the people around us. And so, Laurie, my question to you at the start of this conversation is, what's that unique light that you bring to the world?
The unique light that I bring to the world, that's a great question, Sarah. I would say that my unique light has to do with my heart and my sense of having an open heart. I feel very open-hearted, and I think my open-heartedness gives other people permission to allow their hearts to open too. And so there's a thing that happens, and it's this sense that I have, like when I'm in these rooms with these men or women in prison, is that hearts are opening, like hearts are melting. They're coming alive. And it's almost like people can ask the guards of their hearts to kind of stand down, and it's okay. So that's what it feels like to me. I don't know if that's just my imagination, but it's how it feels to me. And it feels so amazing and exciting and exhilarating for me to be able to be around people. And when I tune into my own heart and imagine my connection with other people's hearts, it just something magic happens. I have the sense that my heart can handle all the pain in the universe. This message came at some point, and I was like, what? How's that possible? It actually came just after I met my husband. And I met my husband when I was 43 and he was 45. And as soon as I heard his story that his mother had committed suicide when he was 11, and I'd really fallen really deeply in love with Peter. And at that moment, it was the first time that I let in like that kind of pain into my body. And I felt it. I imagined what it would feel like the day after I was told that my mother was dead. And what if I was 11 and very much alone in the world was his story, and how much pain was there. And it was like, wow, how am I going to handle this? How can I do this? And it's been a journey since then. And I think meeting Peter and being on this journey with him has opened the door and enabled me to be able to be in a room inside a prison with all the trauma that's inside a system like that. And then in a room, in a circle with people who almost every single person has very deep trauma from their childhoods and so much pain. And I can be in there and I can hold it. And it's not really holding, it's actually allowing it to flow through my heart. What I found is the heart is really like a sieve and it can sort it all out. We just guarding our hearts actually causes more toxins in our bodies, because then our feelings aren't able to be processed properly and flow through the heart. Once we allow that heart to open, that's how we can heal. All that toxic energy that's been stagnant and held in the system can then flow through. So, yeah.
Thanks. Perfect. So welcome, Laurie. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
So remember when we were walking and we talked about how we might bring our listeners into the world that you're working within,
Yes.
and to put them in the shoes of one of the many inmates that you work with and what their life might have been like growing up.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to that a little here?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different paths, but many of them have very common foundations, which include extremely violent childhoods and all the things you'd expect in terms of abuse and neglect. For example, one of our recent graduates was talking about how one of his earliest memories is he was about 8 and his little sister was 6. And they were super hungry. It was like dinner time and they didn't know where any food was. And he remembers getting a can of beans out and just not even knowing what to do. And they like turned on the stove and they put the can on there. And then they were trying to figure out how to like open the can because they were so hungry. And so their mother was downstairs with a needle in her arm and just high as she was every night. And he remembers being hungry most of the time and just trying to feed him and his sister. And so that's just one example of having parents that are high and not available to take care of children, really. And then there's other pathways that are more. One of our participants said, you remember his first memory was the really crowded outdoor festival type of thing. And his mom leaned down and said, "Hey, Mario, you see that purse over there? Go get it for mommy. Be really quiet and go get that purse for mommy." And he'd go over and he'd take a purse and he'd hand it to her. And she looked at him and she said, "Boy, I'm so proud of you." And that's how he learned to get love from his mom from a very young age, was doing criminal activity. It's just not a surprise that this kid's going to end up in prison. And him and his brother were both in prison. His dad had been in prison his entire childhood, except for 1 year when he got out for 1 year and went right back in. And what was interesting about Mario is that he realized he was doing the same thing with his boys, because he would call home. He had 2 boys at home, and his wife would say, "You know what? The kids are starting to act up in school. They're talking back and they're not behaving well. And I want you to talk to them." And she would put his son on the phone. And Mario said he just loves his son so much and he's not there and he feels so guilty and he didn't know what to say. So he's just like loving him up. I'm just telling him that he loves him and he's proud of him. And he realized in this class that he was perpetuating this generational cycle of giving his son love for misbehaving, because his son would hear his mom tell him about the bad things he was doing in school. And so there's this generational cycle that happens. And one of our graduates talked about how him and his little brother, he remembers being sat down on the couch with his little brother, and his stepdad would make them sit there and watch him beat up their mother. and they would have to watch him beat up the mother. And if they cried, she'd get hit harder. And it was just, that was his childhood. And it was just tormenting. And it went on from there, where when he turned 12, he said, he was like, I'm strong enough now, I'm going to do something. And he tried to beat up his stepfather and got pummeled and was laying there just like in agony. And his mother said, come here. And she welcomed him into the bathroom, where she'd always go after she got beat up to clean up, is what he thought. And then he realized what really she was doing in there. And she put a needle in his arm that day and said, this is how we cope with this. This is how we deal with this. He loves us. He puts a roof over our heads. He takes care of us. It's okay. And that's where he first started his heroin addiction. And that guy, actually, Jojo, he ended up telling us that this is a generational thing. It brings us back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, is that his mother and her sister were also made to sit and watch her parents beating her dad, beating up her mom, and actually witnessed their mother being beat up to death in front of them. And these stories they're so heartbreaking. I don't even know if I should be telling your viewers about it, because it's so hard to imagine that as a childhood, that's what your childhood is. But it is, and it also shows the generational cycles, how they continue. And so that's what we're working to do exactly. Is to
Unbelievable. I know you've shared these stories with me before, but it makes me sick to my stomach to think about having to grow up that way.
It really is. It's stomach turning childhoods from beginning to end, just like violence and neglect and verbal abuse and all kinds of stuff like that. That it's like, I used to think, oh yeah, people have trauma in their youth or whatever. They can go to therapy and get over it. And I didn't really understand the extent to which so many people have an absolutely horrific childhood from beginning to end, with no support or very little support, and that we just expect them to grow out of it or just deal or just cope in some way. It's just not going to happen that way.
I can put myself in your shoes having that thought, realize like what a privileged perspective that is in me. Yeah, I had some trauma in my childhood, but nothing like that. Nothing like that.
Yeah. And the difference, like you're mentioning the privileged perspective, there's such different cultural norms in different groups of people in different socioeconomic levels. And one of the things that surprised me, so we do this game in the class called Anybody Else. And you can step into the circle and say something and then say anybody else. And then people, if that fits for them, they step in too. And so a woman at Denver Women stepped into the circle and she said, I was made to fight my cousins and my siblings by the adults in my family, anybody else. And every woman stepped into that circle. There were about 10 of us, except for the volunteers that we were with. It was like, oh my goodness, this is a thing. This is a thing that's done to toughen up the children, to toughen people up so that they won't end up being the one pummeled in school. And it's done out of love, people taking care of their children in this way. And it was done to them. Whatever's done to you, you think is normal. And it's just the way that it is. And I had no idea. So people are taught to use their fists and to solve problems with violence from the youngest of ages. And so unlearning that is part of what we're doing, as well as like really unlearning all of these ways that just seem like the normal right way to do things.
I'm picturing you when you first started doing this work. I imagine you've grown so much in these years. How many years has it been?
6 years.
Yeah.
6 years.
So I'm picturing Laurie 6 years ago. What inspired you to take these relational skills that you've trained in into prisons?
Yeah, Sarah, people ask me this all the time, right? What's your connection to the work? And it's interesting because in a way, I'm like, I don't have any like connection that actually led me to this in particular. It's unfolded in this beautiful flowering of events. And it started with me as a child looking around at the adults in my life and going, wow, there's something wrong here. Like, it doesn't seem like people know how to get along with each other. And I didn't know how to navigate conflict well. And I didn't know how to have a long-term intimate relationship and have it work out. So I spent a lot of time seeking like, how can I communicate better and how can I do this better? And I stumbled into authentic relating in Boulder in 2014. And there was this place called the Integral Center, and people were practicing and flying in from all over the world to learn authentic relating, which I thought was the dumbest name when I first learned it. But what it is a set of skills and tools to help people get along better and relate more authentically and become unleash more of our true selves and have and be able to meet other people with their true selves and create that connection, that authentic relating, and learn how to keep those channels flowing, even when things get difficult, even when we're uncomfortable. And so it changed my life. Doing that work completely changed my relationship with Peter, my husband. And it really enabled me to bring things when I'm feeling uncomfortable and it's difficult. I can bring things now. And I can receive things better when it's coming at me and it doesn't feel good. And so I was learning all these skills and practicing in my life. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And then one thing led to another. A friend of mine did that same work and he said, we need to scale this thing and bring it all over the world. And he distilled the 6-month program down into 2 days. And he started a company and started bringing it all over the world. It's called Authentic Relating Training International. And then he and I were both volunteering at the Boulder County Jail, and we decided to bring the program into the Boulder County Jail. And it was those 2 days that changed my life. And yeah, there was a guy the first day that said, he had like tats, like head to toe. And he says, I've been in therapy since I was this high. And I've done every single program I can get my hands on in and out of the system. And he said, this is the first day I feel like something's gotten into me and I have this whole new possibility for my life. And then the next day, as we were finishing that 2-day course, there were guys that had been in and out of the system for 10 and 20 years. And they said, this is not offered. This is what we need in the system. Please bring this everywhere. Mm. And so that was the day I got my marching orders that I've been like asking the universe for, what am I here for? And I'd been asking for work that I felt more had my heart being involved in my daily work. And then here this happened and it was like, wow. So I just got busy calling prisons and asking if we could bring in a program. And it just went from there. And we just started bringing it everywhere in the state system.
It came to you in a really magical way.
It did. And I believe that I had some experiences leading up to that kind of opened the door for me able to go into prisons and be in there with the kind of dense feeling of trauma that's inside prison walls. As you can imagine, it's just so much unprocessed trauma. But I had this message come to me that my heart can handle all the pain in the universe. And I know that sounds crazy, but somehow it has equipped me to be able to receive all of the stories and have it flow through my heart like a sieve rather than being stuck and causing damage and me not being able to go on. And I've been able to then also help a team form. In Realness Project, we have different course leaders now, and we have different courses going on. And it's just really exciting how it's grown and flourished from there.
I think what you're talking about of allowing yourself to be able to hear the pain, to feel the pain, and allow it to move through you and not get stuck in you. One of my teachers in the past taught me about throughput. I'm a very open vessel. I consume a lot of energy. I feel a lot. Yeah. But I needed to find a way to get it to move through me and out of me back into the earth.
Yes.
And it sounds like somehow you have figured out how to do that for yourself, because I know from knowing you that this work actually lights you up. This work brings you a lot of joy. And so despite all the pain that you witness and hold with the groups that you're working with, you find a way to let it be a joyful experience for you.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. How is that?
It's not hard. It's not hard at all, because what we're doing is it's such a beautiful process where people come in mostly arms crossed, even though everyone in there, what happens is we put a flyer up in the prison and invite people to come do this authentic relating thing and come check it out and be part of this program. And now it's a 6 workshop program. So it's every other week for 6, it's like basically 3 months and then a graduation, 6 full days of workshop. And the first day, even though people have signed up, they're pretty skeptical and looking around and going, what in the heck is this? But pretty soon, the way that this work unfolds, we sit in a circle. It's very egalitarian. I'm not standing up and pointing to the board about things sometimes, but we're just in there exploring what it is to be human together. And we'll do a little teaching piece, and then we're practicing the whole time. And if I'm not leading that section, then I'm practicing with everyone too. And so we're all there to just practice together. And it's just, it's so quickly. It is amazing, the healing power of human connection. I just have to say, prisons are built to isolate and separate, right? And denigrate, all of those things. And they really do. Like that's really real. And so when people come in and they have just even a few moments of being seen, of looking into someone else's eyes and receiving them and being accepted for in their brokenness and in their beauty and all of that, and giving that to someone else, receiving that and giving that, it's like a miracle. And so I get to be sitting in this room full of miracles that are happening, and people just popping and lighting up and hearts melting and opening. And it's to me, it's the most exciting work in the world. And so it's not hard for me to be in my joy around this, even though there's just massively heartbreaking stories that end up being revealed in the program.
And from some of the stories you've shared with me in the past about some of these humans have been in isolation in the prison.
Yes.
This might be some of the only time that they've seen other people at all.
Yeah. It's really true. And most of the people in the prison, like 75% of the prison, is in lockdown. Supposed to be just 20 hours a day. It's illegal to have them now more than 20 hours a day in a cell by themselves. But what happens is they're in a cell by themselves for 20 hours, then they're let out and they're in like a pod of men that who knows what mood everyone's in when they get let out. There's a lot of anger and tension, and things happen. And so things happen, and then they all get put in their cells, and sometimes for days on end, because there's behavior problems. But as you can imagine, it's just a cycle of that over and over again. And terrible things happen that the guards have to witness and clean up, and awful things on our taxpayer dollars while these people are in our custody in 2025.
And then they come into a room with you.
They do. And then here they are in a circle, and just even sitting in close vicinity to someone else is odd and strange and uncomfortable for them at first.
I believe it.
Yeah. And so,
I mean, it was uncomfortable for me to get back into conversation after the pandemic, right? I can imagine it's a skill that they haven't practiced in a while if they're in solitary confinement 20 hours a day.
Yeah. One of the participants said, I've only been talking to people through the vents in the wall for 12 years. And and then when we handed him a flower, we brought him flowers for one of the exercises, and he was holding this flower in his hand, and he said, I haven't touched anything organic in 17 years. Like I haven't touched grass or a tree or anything. And just holding this flower was just incredible, because they don't have a yard like there. They just have cement yard. It's covered. It's just got a barbed wire fence around it. And then he was transferred to another prison. He wrote a letter. He said, Laurie, I'm walking on grass. I walked on grass for the first time in 20 years at that point. And he said, even though he had his shoes and socks on, he's not allowed to go barefoot, but he's walking on grass. And he said he felt his whole bone structure relax, like his bones relaxed, being able to walk on grass.
Laurie, I'm really having to practice that throughput energetic work right now. It's hard to not crumble hearing these stories. As I'm listening to you, it's hard for me to stand here and keep breathing.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. It's so massively heartbreaking. And if you met these people, Sarah, like I wish I could bring the whole world into the room with us. You would not even believe it. You would not believe that this is a room full of murderers and rapists and people that have, many of them have done terrible things. There are definitely people in there who were wrongly convicted and wrongly accused and the whole thing. but the majority of people in there have done some pretty horrible things. And they're still human beings. And they're human beings who can truly get to the point where they're so deeply remorseful and have so much care and empathy for other people. And I don't know, it's hard to think about that many of them will never get out. But I mean, most of them will get out. 97% of the people in prison are getting out. And that's why it is really important that we are rehabilitating. So people are in there for a long time, and we have to teach them how to relate to people. And that's why the whole culture in the prison matters, the whole culture, because you can't learn new skills 5 minutes before you get out of prison and then be a good person on the street. It's not going to work that way. And most of the people in prison have kids, multiple kids. Most of them have people in our programs have an average of 3 children, and they impact those kids from prison. And here's the story, actually, that was a beautiful story. And in our last program, one of the guys said, my son's 14 and he just got a girlfriend. And I felt like I needed to talk to him about the birds and the bees and things like that. And so I didn't know what to do. And I felt really uncomfortable. And I realized, like, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable about having this conversation. I should get out my Realness Project papers and figure out what to do. And I was working through these 5 practices that we have and talking to his son on the phone. And he said it was the most beautiful conversation he's ever had with his son. He was so vulnerable with him and so open and curious and revealing his own experience and just honoring his son. And he said it was just beautiful. And I was floored by that, because I know I don't have kids of my own, but I see my friends and my nieces and nephews, when they get to be those teenage years, in the early teen, like, it's tough to have those conversations, right? And here he is parenting from prison in such a beautiful way.
So that child, that 14-year-old, was impacted because of your work. So it's much broader than just the people that you're working with directly. The intergenerational impact is real.
It's real.
You're telling me some of these stories, and I keep being curious. I have a sense, but can you explain authentic relating? What the heck is it? What is it all about? What are some of the techniques, and what are you actually doing when you bring authentic relating into prisons?
Yeah, good question. When we bring authentic relating into prisons, what we're doing is inviting people into more self-exploration, as well as exploring what it's like to be in a relationship with other people. And so it's both that relationship with self and the relationship with other that we're focused on. And the way the day unfolds is we're inviting people into connection with each other and practicing tools. So we'll introduce a particular skill, and then we will invite people to practice. And then we'll do a debrief and have these open discussions. And those open discussions are sometimes the richest part of the class. People really hearing from each other about what it's like. And people being so surprised, people that have lived together, some of them for 10 or 12 years, they've lived with each other. And it's so amazing watching them interact with each other and being so amazed by each other. Wow, I've known this guy. I've worked next to him in the kitchen for 5 years. And now it's, wow, I just learned something about him in this last 5 minutes I never knew. And the connection that happens, and it just has people just come alive. So authentic relating is a bunch of different skills and tools, and a lot of them active listening.
So just give me some examples of what those skills might be. What are the tools?
So one of the tools we start with is called the 3 levels of conversation. The highest, or the sort of surface level, or the ground level, is informational. And at the informational level of conversation, we talk about information, sports and weather and directions and instructions and all the things. And most people are at that level 90% of their time, of their day or their lives. And so we're all really familiar with that level. All small talk is at that level. And then it's like an elevator going down. The next level we call the personal level. And the personal level is where we get more personal. And that's different for everyone. Some people can consider some information personal. Other people are like, oh, I tell that to everybody. That's informational. It's not personal to me at all. But other people are like, wow, just sharing that I have 3 siblings is a big deal. They don't tell people stuff about themselves like that. So we explore at different levels, and we'll get into dyads and just like the sharing at that level. And what is it like? What does it feel like? And then what could be the next level? What's the next level down in terms of like connection? And we call that an authentic relating, the relational level. And at the relational level, your past doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. And your future is just an illusion. And what we've got is what's happening right here, right now. And that's relational. We're actually relating to the present moment, not something projected from the past or into the future, but we're right here, right now. And so we practice a lot at that level and noticing what's here right now, practice noticing our feelings, our emotions, our thoughts, what's happening over there with you and what's happening in the room, and sharing those things, what we're noticing. So we do a lot of practicing noticing the present moment. So that might be the first round.
I imagine that skill set of practicing noticing what's present right here could go a long way for someone who's in solitary confinement. Mindfulness, isn't it?
And without practicing, without awareness of that, we can drive ourselves crazy and living in the past all the time or living in the future all the time and never really stopping right there in the middle and being in our lives right now. And then we have the 5 practices of authentic relating. 5 practices are, I think, something that does set us apart maybe from other modalities of communication and other classes and stuff, is because it's held inside this context of the 5 practices. Everything else is held inside that. And so the 5 practices are really a way of being, a way of showing up in life differently. And this part changed my life. This is when I discovered this work in 2014. I was at a moment where my husband and I were having difficulties in our marriage, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't like what he was doing, and it was making me mad. And I didn't want to leave the relationship, but I didn't want to stay, and I didn't know what to do. And just these practices, attempting to practice these as soon as I got home from the very first day of that training, changed everything. It gave us more spaciousness, more ways to navigate the relationship. And so just learning, so the first practice is welcome. It's welcome everything is the first practice, welcome everything. I'm going to complicate this a little bit because in prison, for the prison programs, we've changed the 5 practices a little bit from how they do it in the public programs. And that's because we just wanted to keep it, we wanted to have a little more ownership in it and have it really be something you could teach your kids and put on your refrigerator. And so the first practice in the way that we teach it is welcome my experience. I'm going to welcome my experience, whatever that is, all of my experience. And just taking on a spirit of welcome opens up the heart in a way that some people have never experienced before, especially turning towards themselves and welcoming their own experience. So just that first practice can be a big game changer. And then from there, we go to more of a opening our mind, which is check my assumptions. So the second practice is to check my assumptions and to notice them and check them. Like, oh, I noticed that I have an assumption. I'm making up the story about you and I want to check it out. Or about myself. And I notice all my assumptions I've made about myself, all the stories I've made up. And like, when did I make up that story about myself? Wow, I was 5 years old when I decided that it was too scary to have people's eyes on me and I'm too embarrassed to be seen by people. And wow, is that a true story today about me? I can start to look at it and really check my assumptions that I've made. And so that's the second practice. And I'm going through these kind of quickly just because in service of this podcast. The third practice is to reveal my experience. So in revealing my experience, we say this is the doorway to connection. And first of all, connection with myself, because I have to reveal my experience. I can have a lot of dark rooms in the house of me, and I need to go in and turn the light on and reveal something to myself. Oh, I can be defensive and be willing to look at that and reveal it to myself and stop being in denial about how I show up in the world. And so that's the first step in revealing, is to myself. And I don't necessarily have to reveal that to you, but the more I reveal to you, the more I can be known and we can be in relationship with each other. And Jay-Z says in one of his songs, he says, you can't heal what you never reveal. So there's also a lot of benefit in revealing so that we can heal ourselves.
So is that the same principle in prison and in the regular authentic relating programs?
Yes, reveal my experience is the same. The first 2 are the only ones we changed. So the first 2 on the outside are welcome everything and assume nothing. And welcome everything, assume nothing are they're powerful and they're pithy, but we've changed it to welcome my experience and check my assumptions. And then the third one is the same, and the fourth and fifth as well. The third one's reveal my experience. And
I love that you quote Jay-Z as you teach it.
you know, it gives me so much credibility in there. Like, wow, she knows Jay-Z. I'm like, well, that's the only line I know. I have to qualify it. Yeah. Then the fourth practice is own my experience. So now that I've revealed it to myself, how can I own that? And how can I own my experience in life? So I'm not going around blaming the world from my experience. If only the world would show up this way for me, I could be happy. If only I didn't have those parents, if only I had more money, or if only I had whatever. And so it's really letting go of that in service of taking our power back in life. And that can be a lifelong practice. And it can also happen just in a moment by changing my languaging, using I statements instead of you statements, that type of thing. I'm feeling angry right now instead of you're making me angry. That's on my experience. And the other piece about owning my experience is I can own my experience. And my mother had a lot of narcissistic tendencies, and I very much learned to orient towards her at a very young age. And whatever made my mom happy then made me happy because it kept her happy. And I really grew up thinking that I was just like my mom, like we were just the same, because I wasn't owning my experience. And so it also has that meaning, like I get to own my experience and not be owning everybody else's. And then the last one is honor self and honor other, or honor myself and honor others. And in authentic relating, we say it's great to notice like what you have more of a tendency to do. Honor yourself over others, or honor others over yourself. When push comes to shove, or normally in life, are you more focused on yourself and serving yourself, or you're more focused on others and serving them? And neither one is wrong or bad. They're both absolutely fine and worthy. And we can look at how can we maybe bring that a little bit more into balance, and always looking for solutions if it's possible. And then also there's times where it's actually much more appropriate to honor others than myself. Let's just say I agreed to babysit, and then someone asked me to go to a party, and I said I would babysit. So I took to honor others in that moment over just what I want to do. It's appropriate in that moment. And then there's other times where it's someone's asking me to do something, and it's not right for me to do that in this moment. I need to take care of myself. And so honoring myself is where we bring in setting boundaries. We want to be welcoming of the world, but we also want to be setting
boundaries. Remember we were talking about boundaries last time we chatted about all of this. And I was telling you about some of the RLT concepts around boundaries and self-esteem.
Yes.
And it sounds like the relationship grid in RLT, where there's this intersection of healthy boundaries where I'm protected from the world and I'm connected at the same time. And I'm protecting the world from me at the same time as I'm open to others connecting with me. And then the self-esteem access of I am a worthy human being simply for being alive. I have the same essential self-worth as every other human on this planet. I'm not up here grandiose, and I'm not down here in toxic shame. And it sounds like that actually pairs really well with this idea of honoring self and honoring other. What do you think?
Absolutely.
I'm just
Absolutely.
making it up a little bit because I don't know as much as you do about the authentic relating world, but
Yeah, I think it maps on well for honor myself and honor other, the fifth practice. And it also, we have another foundational practice about humility and dignity. And I think it really maps onto the humility dignity diagram. We have a diagram that kind of shows the continuum of what you just said about like this dignity piece of I am worthy just by the inherent of being a human being on this planet. And I have a voice, and my voice matters. And then there's also humility, where my voice is one of many, and I'm here to learn from other people, and I make room for others and learn from others and be curious. And so this balance of humility and dignity, we talk about it, is a way of approaching life and going out into the world. And then something will happen, and it might have us go into either lose our humility or our dignity. And so if I lose my humility, I will go into the shadow of dignity. And the shadow of dignity is where I'll get puffed up and like posturing and arrogant and entitled.
grandiose.
And grandiose, exactly.
Huh. That's
Yeah,
the shadow of dignity.
the
I
shadow of
love
dignity.
that. Uh-huh.
And it can appear as dignity. People will a lot of times think that they're in dignity when they're actually in the shadow of dignity. Yeah. And what I
And a
really,
lot of times we pop up into grandiosity because we're actually covering up for toxic shame. But it
right,
feels good to be up here in grandiose. It
it
doesn't
does.
feel good to be down in toxic shame. It's the shadow of dignity. I love it.
The shadow of dignity. And there's a little litmus test about that. If you're wondering, like, am I in the shadow of dignity or am I in dignity? Which a lot of times, if you're in the shadow, you're not even going to ask that question, right? Because you're just in the shadow. So you're not going to ask the question. But if you find yourself asking the question, one of the ways of looking at it is, am I truly curious right now? Do I have curiosity about other people, about the situation? And if I don't, then I'm in the shadow of dignity. I'm not in dignity. So that's
Mm.
one way of telling.
And in RLT, we talk about it being much easier to pull yourself down out of toxic shame and into a same as eye to eye perspective. It's easier to come up from shame than it is to pull yourself down from grandiosity because grandiosity feels good. I just love that as an antidote of a question of where am I being curious about others and their experience?
And then there's the shadow of humility that we can fall into, where that's where shame and collapse and I feel like shit about myself and I think I'm a loser and I'm not worthy of love or anything like that. And that's in that shadow of humility piece where I've lost my dignity. And so to climb out of that is you've got to be able to bring in some, even a smidge of dignity in the form of something like, I did a bad thing, but I'm not a bad person. Or it could be recognizing that I have needs and I have value and I can find myself back into that center of balance, if you will.
In the RLT framework, Terry Real says, I can hold myself in warm regard despite my human imperfections.
Mm, love that.
It's very similar to what you just said,
Yeah.
finding some dignity. Yeah. I can hold myself and others in warm regard despite their human imperfections. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I'm seeing this dignity line as like a diagonal cut across the grid, right? The relationship grid is like this, like a T.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. What is this continuum called? Dignity,
Yeah. Humility and dignity.
humility,
Humility.
dignity.
Yeah. And yeah, we have this diagram that I could share with you as well. It seems like it would really map well, like what you're talking about. Like we could just really geek out on how to put this all together.
It might map better right on top of that self-esteem line,
Mm.
but it's not exactly the same. So I'm seeing it as slightly a kilter or diagonal. I'm not sure that makes sense though, because it's closer to that energy than it is to the boundaries. When in RLT, that self-esteem line is actually a representation of contempt.
Mm.
When I'm down below, one down, we call it, I'm in toxic shame. That's contempt. That flashlight of contempt is pointing inward. But when I'm up in grandiosity, the flashlight of contempt is pointing outward. It's the same energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing we say, like the shadow of dignity and the shadow of humility kind of wrap around the backside. It's all really one big shadow. It's just, and people can jump back and forth. If you're in a state and you're activated, you're mad at your partner or something like that, then you can jump back and forth between arrogance and blaming to shame and victimhood. It's one big shadow.
Mm, I love this. We could really riff on this for quite a while, but I'm curious to hear more about the impact you're really making with Realness Project. I'm just looking at some of the questions that I wrote up.
I picked out some letters. There's so many letters from people that have done our programs
They
and
write you letters, Laurie.
do. And their handwriting is so amazing. It's so incredible. Like those of us out here that aren't really writing a lot of letters, and it's just incredible to get these letters. It's just so heartwarming to know that it actually makes a difference because you just never know. You go in there and deliver something and does it land and do people take it with them? And now we just finished our seventh cohort there of our RLT. It's funny, we call it the RLT too, but it's the relational leadership training. So they have a critical mass of people there now that have done the program. And so, for example, JoJo says, it is amazing how this program has positively radiated through the culture of this prison. I've witnessed firsthand how incarcerated individuals have opened up, become more effective communicators, and most importantly, display empathy. It truly is spectacular. And he's been in for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this before. And that goes along with our mission, which is to transform the culture of incarceration by empowering human connection. And the reason we want to transform the culture of incarceration is because people need to learn new ways of being and practice them over and over again before they're going to actually be able to do that when they get out in the world again.
And if you're not changing the culture within the prison system, then they're just a lone fish trying to navigate these techniques on their own. So it has to be a culture shift. It has to be a critical mass, or else it's not going to make the real impact that it could.
It's really true, because the culture that is actually there now, if we just leave it be, is gang culture and a culture of suppression and staff and the way it's all set up as far as power dynamics. And so it's really a system of suppression and all these games of the gang manipulation and blackmailing, different things that's done, and all the violence. And so giving people a different game to play is critical. And that's what we're doing. It's just a different game to play. And it's a game that I want people playing in my life. And so I want them playing it too. And when they get out, to be able to have the chance of having a different family life than they had when they went in, and being in community differently. So many of these guys are so fired up to come out and make a difference in society. They really want to be positive influence, and they are already with the people they're talking to on their phone, the kids and their family. But yeah, it's really, I could read you so many letters. I'll read you this one by Tyler. So Tyler did our program twice, once at one prison, and then he was transferred to another one because he had good behavior. And then he wrote this letter. He said, "My name is Tyler. I am 22 years old. Others know me as the kid. Currently, I'm in the Department of Corrections facility. My first prison was at this one prison. I won't say the name of it. I have taken so many classes, and yes, some of them have helped me in some way or another. But the class I'm going to tell you about meant the most and made a major impact in my life. I have made vital amends in my personal relationships. I have new healthy relationships with pro-social people. I loved how much a positive effect this class has had on my life and the others around me. I took it twice. The second time was at a lower custody level at the Rifle Center, Correctional Center. Let me tell you how much of an impact this class had at the first prison I was at, which was a very dangerous prison. At that prison, there was a major problem between opposite races and gangs, and a riot was soon to take place. But the main leaders of each gang participated in this class. At the end of the first day, the shot callers, that's the gang leaders in prison, are called shot callers, all had a sit down and practice the tools that were given to us. If you want specifics, people were going to be hurt badly, maybe even killed. And it didn't happen thanks to authentic relating. Me personally, I'm thankful because I'm a father, a brother, and a son. I feel that it should be mandatory that men and women on the inside the system take this class or workshop. If I had these tools, I would never have joined the Hells Angels gang. I would have probably not run to alcohol and drugs to medicate. I would know how to honor self. I would know how to react appropriately to others. I pray this program expands to not just adults, but our youth as well. This is my testimony. I'm very grateful.
Laurie.
Yeah.
It's so delicious to hear the impact you're making.
Yeah, our team is really dedicated, and it's not easy work because we're talking about going to prisons there's no prisons in our communities where we live generally. They're way far away. We're driving 2.5 hours there and 2.5 hours back, and sometimes through terrible weather and in all different directions and through the mountains sometimes. And yeah, it's crazy, kind of life-changing, but also life-risking work. But we're really dedicated to doing this, and the impact is real.
You say life risking, and I immediately thought, do you ever feel unsafe in the prison itself? But I believe you've told me no, I don't. I feel quite safe.
Yeah, I've never felt unsafe. There was one time at the Boulder County Jail when the power went out and it got dark in that room. It was not pitch dark, but it was pretty close to pitch dark. And I was there with one other volunteer, one other female volunteer, and it was all men. And and honestly, jails can be more dangerous than prisons because people have just come off the street doing violence and things like that, and they're also freaked out about being arrested and put in jail, and the whole thing is so dramatic. And but I felt so safe in that room for those moments it was pitch dark. I didn't for one second think that anyone would do anything, and they didn't. And I've always felt like if someone did something, that everyone else would be like they're protecting me in a moment. I've just never felt it. I've just never felt any kind of energy. There's been a couple of times in 6 years where there's been almost a fight in like people in the class got mad at each other and they were like getting to that. They're escalating, but it didn't happen either time. And both times they came out just so grateful that they had learned these skills and they got to practice them and it didn't escalate.
I'm imagining them coming into the room for the first time with you. And as you were just telling me that story, I thought of you as like this light filled being, this like representation of pure love that you're bringing into their lives. That's just how I saw it. But as they walk into the room with you for the first time, I'm so curious how you invite them in and help them create psychological safety for themselves and for the group.
Yeah, it's a
Like
really good
at the
question.
beginning,
Yeah.
what are you doing that helps them settle and be willing to open?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, Sarah. I think going into prisons, that most people going in aren't necessarily being as vulnerable as we are as authentic relators walking in the room. And in our introductions, we'll really share from the heart about why we're there and what we're doing and what our intentions are. And they really respond to that. I think one thing about being in prison is you become very astute measuring people up. Like you can see what are they really about, and they really can measure people up very quickly. So we go in there with a team of 4 people each time. That's what our intention is every time we go in with at least 4 people. And we try to have a mix of men and women and a diverse group that goes in. And I think that makes a difference too. They see us coming in and we're not all just one kind of people. And we sit amongst them. So we'll before people come in, because if you don't put your stuff down in the chairs separate, they'll sit so that we all end up having to sit together, our group. And so we have to put our stuff on the chairs before they come in so that we're sitting amongst them. And that just signals that we trust them. We're not afraid of them. We see them as human beings. And I think that's also unusual for other groups don't do that necessarily. They might sit behind a desk or chair or up in front of a room more. And then we set a really clear context, like what we're doing in here about exploring together and we're co-creating and every voice matters. And that we're all here to be air traffic controllers of the room so that everyone's voices can come in and that not one person isn't like doing all the talking. And then really challenging people. If you're someone who doesn't like to speak normally in a group, like challenging you to bring your voice because your voice matters. And we're all here to do this together. But I think what you pointed to earlier about going in there just with an open heart and bringing light into a very dark place, people just start to light up and they could feel that. And I sometimes think that all these tools and skills that we're bringing, they're all great and everything. But what's most important is that we're going in there with that light and love and joy and like that sense of wonder and awe for just being alive.
Yes, it's got to be more than just tools. So thank you for speaking to that. I think that must be right. I'm curious if there are any universal insights that you've had about humans and human connection that you've learned through the work with Realness Project.
Yeah, it's been interesting from the start. Someone had said to us, can you prove that this works with the Latino community? And I said, I can't prove that. Like from the authentic relating world on the outside, it's mostly white people that are signing up for this work, especially 6 years ago when it was mostly just in the States. But now it's all over the world. And even still, it's mostly a privileged group of people that think to spend like, oh, I want to go to this weekend workshop on relationships. That's mostly what's happening. It seems like it's just not part of other cultures as much. So, but now that we've been doing this now 6 years in prison, and I've sat in very diverse circles with people of all different backgrounds and nationalities, and really just observing and witnessing humans being human together. I can safely say this works for human beings. And that we're all so much more alike than we are different, really, truly. And, that's what comes out. And even just a 5 or 10 minute exercise, and people just get lit up and share, like, oh my God, I had no idea that I would have so much in common with this person. Like, I thought we were opposites. And I thought that there's no way. And then people just share about that. And it's just so liberating. It's so connecting. It's so humanizing for all of us to each other. And so that's what I see. I also see the value of in this fast-paced world that we're living in. And technology is calling us to act at an even faster pace. And the truth is, we are biological beings like trees, and we're not meant to necessarily operate at the speed of technology. And a lot of these skills that we're teaching are meant to slow things down. When we can learn to slow down and take a little bit more time with each other. If I can spend just like when Peter and I get together at the end of the day and he starts sharing something, I could immediately, oh yeah, my day was like that too. Let me tell you about this. Or, oh, I can relate to that. I agree with you right away from him sharing. Or I can choose to stay with his experience longer. And so much of what we're teaching in the program and like what people get is skills and ways to stay with the other person's experience way longer than we normally would. Till even you get to a place where it's actually there's silence. And he's actually said everything he needs to say. And I reflected and I shared impact and I told him what it was like to hear that. And then I maybe ask questions and explore and stay with his experience way longer. It's a miracle what happens because it's so rare these days that people get that gift of someone staying with their experience longer. And so it lights people up and it brings people to more depth of connection. And so I see that happening. And that seems universal too, that the healing that can happen when someone's given that gift.
It's so beautiful, Laurie. One of the questions I had for you is what types of relationship skill sets can we share with our audience that anyone can implement? And that right there is something that everybody can benefit from. In my previous episode, I talk a lot about nature and how we're meant to actually move at the pace of nature. We're animals on this planet and we move way too fast. But I really benefit from slowing down, and I think most of us do. I wanted to speak to this idea of universal insights about humans. As you were talking about doing this work with different cultures, I had the thought the culture of human beingness runs deeper than any other culture that human beings identify as. That we have, was what you said, was we have more in common than we have different. And the other thing that I had been thinking about while you were speaking earlier is it reminded me of a Stephen Porges quote. And he says, human beings are good. And he goes on to say, and good human beings deserve to know what's happening inside their brains. But human beings are good. Yeah, we all have the capacity for darkness, but usually it gets bred into us by our upbringing.
It absolutely does. And I think it is that simple. After working with over 1,000 people in the system, in prison, I think that statement, human beings are good, is what I've learned. That it gets bred out of us, it gets beaten out of us. One of the guys in one of the recent programs said, yeah, he remembers one of his first memories was his mother getting down to his level. He thinks about 5. And she looked into his eyes and she said, you know what? You look just like your dad. And I hate your dad. And I hate you. And that's his first memory. And if that's not going to turn you into some kind of self-hating monster, I don't know what will. And like you said, that light gets shined in and it gets shined out. And that hate, that light of whatever the light is, if it's a light of hatred. But that guy, he is such a sweet guy. And he was so grateful for this program. And he just was crying, telling me how grateful he is to receive this skill set and be able to operate differently. And he has a relationship with this girl and he wants to do it well. And he's just wanting to find ways of loving better, loving ourselves better, loving each other.
Close to tears hearing that story, especially since I have a little person in my life. Parenting has been really hard, but I've never said anything like that to my kid. I've had moments where you might feel tough things, but to actually say that to a 5-year-old and have it be their first memory, I'm really sick hearing that.
And it's a very common story with people in prison, people that their parents have verbally abused them their whole childhood. And I'm realizing how much more common sexual abuse is for people in prison. And as people are getting more and more comfortable, they're sharing in front of them with other men the sexual abuse that they have endured in their life. So I'll leave you with this one story. We were in a circle of men, and it was the second day of the workshop. And this Black guy next to me said, "What's most alive for me is that yesterday you asked us to do that exercise and asked us to pick someone that we would never normally talk to." He said, "So I picked that guy." And he pointed across the circle at this bald white guy. And they looked at each other and they weren't really smiling. And I didn't know where this was going to go. But he said, "In that exercise, I realized that we actually had a lot in common. And so after dinner last night, I asked him if he wanted to sit down and talk. And we talked for an hour and a half. And he said, now that guy's my brother." And they literally got up and they hugged in the middle of the circle, in the middle of this prison, in the middle of Colorado.
Love that. They just got up and hugged right there. So they get to sit down and talk to each other. They get time to socialize.
It totally depends on the prison. That prison is a prison that's a little bit lighter. It's actually the minimum of all minimum prisons in Colorado is at Rifle. And even at Rifle, that people, they've told me that they mostly will sit at tables with people of the same skin color. And in prison, it's very much, that's how it is in prison. Even if you don't have any bad feelings about anyone, you sit with the people with your skin color because that is the way that it's done for the most part. But at Rifle, it's a little bit lighter than that, you know. So they were able to do that.
This podcast may bring up complex emotional reactions in you. This is not a replacement for personal support with someone trained to guide you through deeper exploration. Relational Life Foundation offers an incredible program that makes personal therapy services affordable to everyone. You deserve to know about this opportunity to experience private relational life therapy at a sliding scale rate. The foundation will personally match you with an RLT practitioner in training who aligns with your particular background and preferences. You'll even receive a free 15-minute consultation to ensure that it's the right fit before you commit. I hope you'll take this next step toward creating meaningful change in your relationships. Learn more at relationallifefoundation.org or click the link in our show notes. And now, back to our program. I want to make sure that we get in here what the next steps are for Realness Project, like what the next year looks like for you. And also, I'm curious, how can listeners support you or engage in your work and your mission?
Okay, great. So we have a lot of exciting things happening at Realness Project. We are expanding our programming in the prison system. We're actually rolling out our RLT2, which is our Relational Leadership Training 2, for people who have done our RLT1 at least twice. So people are just signing up. They, want to be in community. And so this is happening and it's expanding. So that's really exciting. Expanding the power of human connection in the prison system, that's our goal. And outside the prison system. And so getting into more prisons is definitely more on our radar, expanding. And we're also working a lot at Denver Women's Prison right now as well. And we're putting together some grant proposals. And our next big project is to create a Realness Healing House in Denver. And that Realness Healing House will be an extension of what we're doing in the prison, so people can come out and transition into a sober living house that will be a halfway house. And it will be based on authentic relating principles and practices, and will also have other healing modalities, like art and music and acupuncture and other things. And so that's the vision for that, to have a real place where people can feel connection. And then we also have public nights where people can come in and do like connection nights, which would be really different for people to have the bravery in a community to come into a house that has people coming out of prison. But that's a way of integrating people and people realizing like these people have served their time and they've done a lot of healing work and they're here to be in community in a healthy way.
What a gift that you're offering them if this house gets created. How can listeners learn more about Realness Project, support you in your efforts, and engage with your mission?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Sarah. If you go to www.realnessproject.org, you will find our website. And on the front page, there's a 6-minute video that's definitely worth watching. And that really gives you a sense of what we're up to. And then there's a tab on the top that says The Ripple. And that tab is about joining the ripple of human connection, because that's what we're up to here. And it's our monthly giving program. And every month you'll get a narrative about someone that you're helping in prison and how their transformation is rippling out into the community. And that can be as little as $10 a month. You can support one person to do our Art of Being Human course, which is just a 2-day course. And of course, any multiple thereof would be greatly appreciated.
I love that. The ripple.
The ripple.
And then they get letters or stories. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And discounts to our events if you're in town. And yeah, we have really beautiful events that we put on every year. And then if you want to make a splash, we call it a splash, is a one-time donation. A ripple or a splash, there's a donate button there. Yeah, we appreciate any support.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all of this with me and with our listeners. I love the work you're doing.
Sarah, thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here with you. And I love what you're up to. And you have a big voice to share with the world. And I love what you're doing. Thank you for inviting me.
I love you, Laurie.
I love you too.
I'm so glad we're friends.
Me too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Facets of Connection. If you have any questions or would like to suggest a topic or a guest for a future episode, write me an email or send a voice memo to sarah@facetsofconnection.com. This show is brought to you by Relational Life Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending the chronic epidemic of loneliness by fostering community and transforming relationships. If you want to help us continue this work, you can make a contribution at relationallifefoundation.org/donate. Thank you in advance for your support. See you soon.